Hello, everyone. Hope you're feeling energized in this morning. Just before we start my keynote, Software Developers Path into Blockchain, I see a lot of people here this morning. Just quick hands raised. How many of you, raise your hand if you're a software developer? Wow. OK. Raise your hand if you're not technical at all, if you're not a technical profile. Wow, one. Congratulations, welcome. OK, I don't have a clicker. Yes, working. OK, just a quick kind of background on myself and what I'm doing here and what value can I provide you in these 20 minutes that follow. Originally, I'm just a software developer. I did the usual thing, coded a lot, day and night. At some point, I started my own companies. Had some failures, some successes. So then I stopped coding so much and start managing a little bit more. Then as I sold to a startup, I moved into the US where I was a CTO for a fintech startup. And since the beginning of last year, I went kind of the consultant freelancer route. And I've worked basically as a CTO, product manager, innovation advisor for enterprises. And the one thing that I'm going to tell you about today, a blockchain consultant. So I've been in the blockchain space since 2016. I've held some cryptocurrency. I've done some architecture work. I totally rode the wave of the ICOs a couple of years ago. And that's what I'm going to tell you today. I'm not going to bother you with all the inner details from the beginning. I'm also not going to be anywhere near very technical. I will start like 1 year ago. I wrote this article, How to Build a Tech Team for Blockchain Projects. This was based on my experience building my own team and also with some clients back then. And I just wanted to put the word out. And to my surprise, this single article went like wildfire. It got picked by HackerNoon, the Next Web, and a few other media outlets. It was great, to be honest, for me, kind of surprising. And basically, this is where I'm going to start. And with this attraction of this simple article, I got approached by a lot of software developers like, dude, I want to be this guy. I want to be trained, and I want to leap into the blockchain space. I remember I heard 3 people out of this blog post, which I'm going to tell you about later in the presentation. It's funny because the article was not targeted at software developers at all. It was just for companies to acquire clients. OK, this article was based in a few cornerstones of why is it so challenging and so different to build blockchain projects than it is building teams for the more usual stacks. First thing is, I mean, you heard about cryptocurrency, ICOs, Bitcoin, and all this price craze, all this hype that went on. And the key thing is tech manager or recruiter or CTO, typically for the normal Java, .NET, whatever stack, it goes and looks for the guy with 3 to 5 years experience doing the same framework or whatever that is meaningful for the project. And that's it. There's the market rate for the guy, the company pays, and it's OK. The problem is that in the blockchain space, if someone has been doing it for 3 to 5 years, well, either the guy mined cryptocurrencies very early on, or the guy purchased them at a very cheap price. So the guy is probably rich by now. So it's not really willing to be employed by a company, which is a challenge. So we can skip this. Then the companies can go for the not so experienced people. But these guys have a huge demand. There's a huge demand to supply a shortage in the market right now, even now that blockchain is not like so hypey as it was a year or 2 ago. I just grabbed these few news pieces from Google News yesterday. So it's still very current that blockchain is still very underserved in terms of the talent available. So that leads me to the third really important point, which is, well, you cannot really go and find people in the market that have at the experience, and you can pay market rates. So in fact, you can train people, and this is exactly what I'm telling you about today. This is an article that I wrote also later last year, but it's really basically telling the world how I do things to really train people, to my teams, to my clients. Because if a software developer is good, if he has some foundational knowledge, it's definitely possible to train, to evolve, and to leap into this space. I'm going to lay out a few cornerstones that I feel, in my perspective as a CTO, they are really important to pick up on an interview, because that's like the little sparkles that people will pick up on to evolve further. So, whoops, sorry. First, just before we go there, I think it's very important to just give you these couple minutes of background. Kind of hands raised from like, have you heard about blockchain before? Okay, I would expect that. Would you consider yourself someone who knows about blockchain and who works on the blockchain field? Okay, I would expect that. Fair enough. So you know already that blockchain is definitely a distributed database, and that's nothing new about that part. The part that is really new is that nobody has complete control over the data, and that creates a few very interesting properties. Because although it's decentralized, it is definitely transparent and accountable and immutable. This is interesting for a few things. So the first use case that you know about definitely is the financial one, cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrencies are interesting as a use case because they disrupt something that works very badly, although we are very used to it, all of us. If I'm going to send money to you, I need to send money to my bank, then to your bank, then to you. In the middle, there's a myriad of players. There's central banks, there's clearance houses, there's a lot of people in between. So it ends up taking a few days. We pay high fees. We are definitely used to it, but there's better ways. So when cryptocurrencies came up, and the one you know better is definitely Bitcoin, it allowed peer-to-peer money transfers with the typical properties of security that you would expect in money transfer. And that's definitely why it picked up and why it got headlines and people really got to attention to it. Then, after Bitcoin, Ethereum came up and proposed something that pushed this forward with smart contracts functionality, not just transaction posting on the blockchain. And it creates like also a myriad of use cases that are possible upon smart contracts and digital currencies. It's not just the financial ones. It's all about the more like enterprisey even, like title records, ownerships, intellectual property. And from these, we can branch into a lot of mixes between financial, non-financial sides of the use cases, which a lot of companies are definitely exploring. So back to my previous point, this is why really you are here, is how can software developers get into the blockchain space? So this is definitely my opinion. This is not like a Wikipedia entry or anything that tells the truth. It's just my opinion. Based on, I've been interviewed more than 500 developers over the past 5 years, hiring more than 50, and a lot of them lately for blockchain teams specifically, for several companies, mostly my clients, and also my own team that works in-house with me. And I did this not being a recruiter. I'm definitely not a recruiter. I did this as a CTO, team lead, and consultant for my clients. So let's go to these cornerstone steps that I look for in interviews when I'm willing to employ people who have no previous experience in blockchain, but I want to train them. So the first thing is you get what blockchain is and roughly what can be done with it. Odds are you never played with it. Odds are you don't know a lot of details, but you need to get it. You need to get it beyond just the buzzwords like, oh, it's immutable, trustless, accountable, whatever. You need to understand also beyond cryptocurrency like smart contracts, what can be done with it. Some people come to me and they see these very futuristic aspects of it, and it's okay, it's understanding. The second point is, in terms of the experience I look for, you have done something meaningful that is not a totally centralized and monolithic architecture. You have your mind open to, ideally, you did distributed computing, peer-to-peer architectures. You know that. That's kind of ideal scenario, but it's not really, usual. So at least you need to have some experience with doing microservices, or at least some good experience with APIs and a good solid understanding of how different modules, systems, parts of an architecture play with each other. Because in the blockchain space, it's really a distributed computing network that then has a consensus algorithm. There's a myriad of implementations nowadays. There's definitely the public networks that you have heard of that have scalability issues and whatever. But most of the opportunities are actually in private setups, consortium blockchains that are explored by the enterprises. So these are a little bit more simple in some scenarios, and they are not very far away from a typical distributed computing scenario. Third, I like this a lot, is I like to say you eat new tech stacks for breakfast. So I love, otherwise, the typical guy who has been doing like .NET for 10 years and feels really safe, is not really open to challenging himself, it's probably not a great fit for this kind of challenge. But the guy who gives me the Git handle, and I go and I see things done in a few different languages and ask, whoa, what job did you do this for? And the guy says, no, it was not for work, it was just for fun. I wanted to learn about React or about whatever new that came up. That's really useful, because when you talk about blockchain, blockchain is not really a tech stack or a framework. Blockchain is just an architecture pattern. There's a lot of tools available in the blockchain space. It's definitely not standardized, not normalized. Just to give you an example, I just put together some logos. These are all the technologies we've used the most at TechHQ, my company. And it's just a long tail, and it's ever evolving. New tools are coming up. Some tools that are used today, odds are they will not even exist in 2 or 3 years. So this appetite for new stacks, for new challenges, new frameworks, is definitely table stakes for me to hire someone for this kind of thing. The fourth one might be a little bit surprising, but you need to know how to make your code run efficiently. And what do I mean? Basically, the paradigm is a little bit different when you code smart contracts. Because typically, of course, we all know the basics of data structures and algorithms. But typically, that means in pre-blockchain world, it means just, yeah, my stuff runs fast, runs slow. Too slow, I need to change. Otherwise, it's just fine. In the blockchain space, there's gas to be paid in mostly public architectures that need to reward miners. And gas is paid upon usage of resources, memory, storage, processor. So you really need to know the basics of algorithms, data structures, really in a way that you can use that knowledge already to code smart contracts properly. You need to learn about smart contracts, like how to do it in smart contracts, but that's really, you puts you on a leg up. And the fifth might come as a little bit of a surprise, but you can tell what great user experience is. I don't mean it as a designer. You don't need to do like fancy mobile apps. That's not the point. But the thing is, in blockchain, there's the long tail right now, and we're all talking about features, frameworks, and names. That's not really useful for the end user, because the end user has problems to solve, and most people, I mean, blockchain comes from a very geeky kind of back-end protocol mindset community that thinks in features, in frameworks, in protocols. And the end user is still worried about his needs. Also, in blockchain, there's usually the need to craft sound incentive structures based on token economies and consensus protocols that serve that. This needs to put you on the eyes of the user, and the user is possibly not even the end user, the consumer of the service, might be just the developer that will consume your smart contracts. You need to understand how this guy thinks and what, you know, what really causes this guy to behave according to the specification. I'll just tell you these 3 examples. These are the 3 guys I hired based on the post that I wrote 1 year ago that I told you about. And they are 3 very different profiles. So Alberto is a senior architect, 20 years of experience in supercomputing, distributed computing for banks. He had never done anything with blockchain as of a year ago, even 11 months ago. And he reached out to me. He had just moved from Australia to Europe. He wanted to reskill. And blockchain sounds just right. In 1 year, it made a huge evolution. He's now a leading architect in the consortium blockchains, and he's also pretty good in doing token economies. He's definitely leading the pack on this. Bernardo is the typical geeky profile, the guy who has the GitHub with several different stacks. He eats definitely new stacks for breakfast. He's somewhat junior in the beginning, but he has evolved a lot. In under a year, he now is definitely a master of Ethereum to start with. Like, he knows Solidity smart contracts in and out, like gas spending and all that. And he definitely knows also beyond that, like Hyperledger, some other tools. So he's definitely mastered the tools and mastered the pace of evolution of such tools. Bradley is a non-technical profile. He's definitely out of college. He wanted to have some experience with blockchain on a functional level. He evolved a lot, not to coding, but to writing white papers, to describing architecture, to describing propositions, much more on the business side. So this is to say that, I mean, it is doable. If you want to jump into the space, it's definitely doable. And just to tell you, like I told you, and I'm kind of selling you this vision that, yeah, there's an imbalance between demand and supply of talent in this space. So you should come into it, reskill yourself, and get employed at higher rates. Well, where does this opportunity comes from? How are these companies riding the blockchain wave so that they want to employ you if you reskill? Most opportunities these days come from the enterprise, not anymore from crazy ICOs like not long ago. And typically how enterprises are doing this is they all start with asset registry in some way. I'm putting slides of cars because I work with most car OEMs in Europe. But it's basically anything. I've done it for cars, for parts of planes, pharmaceuticals, houses, you know, assets as in whatever. Registry as in the legal entity that records something as non-duplicate, original, etc. Most companies started this with proof of concepts and somewhat sterile use cases, and soon they added to evolve into more supply chain things. Because telling you as an example of the car industry, which is a very good proxy for basically most industries, like a car is not a diamond. Is not like a unique thing that cannot be broken down into parts. Actually, to assess if a car is original, if it's legit, if it's good, you need to break down these analyses to the actual parts. Like, are the parts themselves original? Were they installed by a certified mechanic? You know, all these things matter. So it's more than just tracking the car as the asset. It's like breaking the car down into different assets that compose the car. All these assets have a track record, so they need to be tracked. All the actions need to be tracked. There's multiple actors into a system. So these systems get a little bit more complex pretty easily. And honestly, that's much more compelling as a blockchain architecture. Upon this, and just to give you like an insight, we are launching our own protocol at TechHQ called Moray, which basically encapsulates most of the work we've done for clients, and we're just putting out as a protocol of ourselves. So it has the supply chain part, which basically is tracking some part from manufacturing all the way to actually being used as the service is rendered. It has an economy, because in the end, when a service is rendering, someone is paying for it, and all the money chain goes back to the one who manufactured it, and all the suppliers, and all the transporters in the beginning, in the middle. It has the service itself, which has to have mobile apps, interfaces for people to consume them. And definitely there's a marketplace with incentives and all the economy support for these services to be provided by someone and consumed by someone else. It has all these different parts. There's this token economy, as I told you about. There's all this trace and tracking supply chain. And there's this services marketplace. So it's a huge protocol. The services marketplace is definitely being fueled by some of our partners, mostly in automotive, also one in pharma, one in the airplane industry. But all the back end of this is basically modular. So this is just to give you an example of what we are doing with blockchain. And as a proxy, like if you jump into the space, this is the typical kind of thing that is mostly being done right now and creating the most opportunities for jobs in the space. Also, kind of, just before we finish, I'm just descoping from all this blockchain talk to tell you that blockchain is usually not something that works as a standalone. It's not something that is like a mobile app that you put in the hands of someone and provides value to someone. Blockchain is typically a protocol layer that is just a layer in a broader stack. Typically, the challenges in the enterprise that, again, fuel the most jobs and opportunities in the space, and the rationale for these companies to create blockchain protocols and to go for it is because they have a lot of data, typically grabbed by whatever Internet of Things kind of devices, in manufacturing, in transport, in whatever. So there's a lot of data being pumped. But pumped to where? Data is being pumped to ERP systems that, and this is the problem, typically are spread across different subsidiaries or companies or even competitor companies. So it cannot be aggregated because there's such distrusting relationships between these parties. That's typically where it's interesting for these companies to create a blockchain protocol that can aggregate this data from competitor parties. The token economy entails an incentive structure where they feel secure because data is not compromised, but also accountable for whatever goes on. But the key thing is that it makes data normalized in a way that it can be used, cleaned and used by the layers above it. And these layers can be, I mean, this is a little bit of buzzword bingo here, but it can be done, it can be dealt by machine learning algorithms, making forecasts and planning and whatever. It can be done like just normal data analysis, typical Excel sheet kind of thing. Or it can be just visualized in dashboards that support decision makers to make more accurate decisions based on data that they couldn't use otherwise. So that's where the blockchain protocol fits in, these kind of architectures, and why it is really important in untapping these possibilities for decision makers. The typical way we work with clients at TechHQ, just give you an example what a developer typically has to go through in this kind of scenario, is we do a workshop because, quite honestly, although a lot of companies are hiring a lot of people for blockchain, they have no clue what to give them to do. They understand they need to do something on the blockchain because of these core challenges, but they don't necessarily understand what needs to be done. So we typically start with not coding anything. It's just going in, doing a workshop like, what's your problem, and let's figure out an architecture and token economy, a blockchain solution that fits your needs. Then typically companies demand like a proof of concept, something that in like 2, 3, even 6 months can really be a punchy proposition to validate their assumptions. Like, is this blockchain protocol going to cut it? And these proof of concepts usually were like asset registry of some sort. Nowadays, it's a little bit beyond that. Is like companies are mostly launching protocols, either supply chain protocols with their existing partners, or like industry-wide consortiums among competitors and all that. So it's typically a proof of concept here is typically the part of a broader protocol that will serve these broader needs. So it's typically like 2, 3, 6 months of development time, typically very focused on the core smart contracts. So there's a lot of smart contract coding, typically Solidity or Hyperledger. Also some visualization dashboard, because in the end it will need to be presented to someone who couldn't, who doesn't give a shit about smart contracts or blockchain. And in the end, it really needs to transition into a market viable product. Something that can really be implemented on a pilot that is public, that has skin in the game, that has really transactions, actual transactions going on. So this is what we do at TechHQ, and this is only possible in the blockchain space because we created this way of kind of scaling our operations on the blockchain space, and this is only done by hiring people and training them on the blockchain, both like consultants, functional people, but mostly, and that's where the real bottleneck is, coding possibilities, like software developers who are willing to come into the space and to reskill themselves and to create great stuff to put out and create value to the world. So this is basically it. Thanks for having me, and hope I gave you some value nuggets to, if you want to reskill yourself or if you want to come into the space. I hope you feel inspired. If you need anything or if you want to bounce some ideas, just shoot me an email and I should be open for a great discussion with you. Thank you for having me. Have a nice day.